Let me tell you, there are few things more annoying than a car that just refuses to run right, and a bad mass airflow sensor is one of the most common culprits in the book. The tricky part is that a failing mass airflow sensor, or MAF, can mimic so many other problems. It can feel like a bad fuel pump, a vacuum leak, or even a transmission issue. But if you know what to look for, you can narrow it down pretty quickly. The most obvious sign, the one that usually sends people panicking to the mechanic, is the check engine light. When this lights up, you need to plug in an OBD2 scanner. You are typically looking for codes like P0171 or P0174. These are System 2 lean codes. This means the computer thinks there is too much air and not enough fuel. Why? Because the mass airflow sensor is under-reporting the airflow. It is telling the computer, hey, only a little bit of air is coming in. So the computer injects a tiny amount of fuel, but in reality, a ton of air is rushing in. The result is a lean mixture that triggers the light. Beyond the warning light, the most physical symptom you will feel is hesitation or bogging down when you accelerate. Imagine you're at a stop sign. You see a gap in traffic and you mash the gas pedal to merge. Instead of shooting forward, the car stumbles. Maybe it coughs or jerks, and for a terrifying second, you're not moving fast enough. That is the classic lean bog. When you open the throttle quickly, a massive gulp of air enters the engine. If the mass airflow sensor is dirty or failing, it is slow to react. It does not tell the computer about that air fast enough. So for a split second, the engine gets all that air but no extra fuel, and it falls on its face. Once the sensor catches up, the car might suddenly surge forward, which can be just as dangerous. This jerky, unpredictable acceleration is a hallmark of airflow sensor issues. Another major symptom is a rough idle. When you're sitting at a red light, your engine should be smooth. You should barely feel it running. But if your mass airflow sensor is sending erratic signals, the idle will bounce up and down. The tachometer needle might fluctuate between 500 and 1000 RPM. Sometimes it might dip so low that the car actually stalls and dies. This happens because at idle, the amount of air entering the engine is very small. The sensor needs to be extremely sensitive to measure this tiny amount of airflow. If the sensor wire is coated in grime or oil, it loses that sensitivity. It gives the computer a jumpy, unstable reading, and the computer chases its tail trying to adjust the fuel, causing that hunting idle. It's like trying to have a conversation on a phone with a bad connection. You only catch every other word, so you keep asking, what? Which breaks the flow. Speaking of grime, that brings us to one of the biggest causes of these symptoms. If you use an oiled aftermarket air filter, you have to be very careful. Those filters rely on oil to trap dirt. If you over-oil the filter after cleaning it, that excess oil gets sucked right onto the delicate mass airflow sensor wire. The oil creates a sticky coating that traps microscopic dust. Eventually, the wire gets insulated by this layer of gunk. Since the sensor works by heat transfer, that insulation prevents the air from cooling the wire down properly. The sensor thinks less air is flowing than there actually is. This is why we often see these problems on modified cars. If you have recently serviced your air filter and suddenly have a rough idle or hesitation a week later, there is a very high chance your sensor is contaminated. You might also notice really poor fuel economy. Now, this can go two ways. If the sensor is dead and giving no signal, the computer goes into what we call limp mode. It ignores the sensor completely and runs off a pre-programmed safety map. This map is designed to be rich, meaning it dumps extra fuel just to be safe so the engine does not overheat. You'll be burning way more gas than necessary. On the other hand, if the sensor is just skewed, causing a lean condition, you might think you are saving gas, but you are actually making the engine work much harder to maintain speed, which also destroys your efficiency. Plus, running lean makes the engine run hotter, which can damage your catalytic converter over time. So ignoring a bad mass airflow sensor can lead to a repair bill that is much bigger than just the sensor itself. There's a simple little trick you can do in your driveway to test this if your car is running really roughly. With the engine off, pop the hood and locate the mass airflow sensor on the intake tube. Unplug the electrical connector. Now, start the car. If the mass airflow sensor was the problem, the car might actually run better now. I know that sounds backward, but hear me out. When you unplug it, you force the computer to enter that safety default mode I mentioned. It stops listening to the lying sensor and uses its backup tables. If the rough idle smooths out and the car stops stalling when you unplug the sensor, that's a massive clue that the sensor was sending bad data. Of course, the check engine light will stay on, but you have just confirmed the source of the issue without spending a dime. However, a word of caution. Before you go out and buy a new sensor, which can cost anywhere from $100 to $300 for a quality unit, check for vacuum leaks. A vacuum leak is when air enters the engine through a crack in a hose or a loose gasket after the mass airflow sensor. This is is unmetered air. The sensor didn't count it, so the computer doesn't know about it. This creates the exact same symptoms as a bad sensor: lean codes, rough idle, and hesitation. A quick inspection of your intake boot is mandatory. Look for cracks in the rubber accordion section between the sensor and the engine. If that rubber is cracked, air is sneaking in. I have seen so many people replace a perfectly good mass airflow sensor only to find out the problem was a $10 rubber hose. Always verify the basics first.